If you haven't, for those of you who don't know, Missouri is about to cut off all trans affirmative care, not just for minors, though. This is also going to apply to adults. And they're essentially making it impossible in Missouri to get trans affirmative care, right? So, what am I talking about? Well, let me open up my laptop window here and we can just read this article. Rather than trying to sum this up, I'll just read the whole thing to you guys. Make this a lot easier. I'll put this down in the chat for those of you at home who want to follow along. Read this for yourself later. There it is. Gender affirming care for adults is now basically banned in Missouri. State's Attorney General Andrew Bailey announced an emergency regulation that erects enormous barriers to care for all trans people. Sorry, for trans people of all ages. So, first off, what exactly is an emergency regulation, right? And why does the Attorney General get to do that? I mean, wouldn't that come from the governor or something? Like an executive order, something like that? I mean, can an Attorney General just decide that he's gonna, we're just gonna decide all of a sudden new regulation that basically outlaws this or that? I didn't know the Attorney General could do that. So let's read a little bit more about what's going on here. Missouri is the first state to severely restrict gender-affirming care for transgender adults amid a nationwide GOP-led push to legislate away trans rights. See, up until this point, it's always been, we're here to protect the kids, but now they're kind of showing their true colors here, right? Because it was never about that to begin with, folks, right? It was always about basically legislating transgender out of existence, transgender people out of existence. That was the point from the beginning. And the whole thing, with protecting the kids was just a way to get in the door there, a way to make it seem okay to, to the American people, right? Because here's the thing, right? Like I said last time, it is your right to be a transgender person. It's your right to do anything you want with your body. So you can't really make an argument against it without coming off like a giant bigot. So how do they do it? They for the last year they've been saying, well, we're just here to protect the kids. That's the angle that they took, right? Kind of shows here that it's just complete total BS of the highest order, as we all knew. Let's read on a little more before I make more comments. The state's Attorney General, Andrew Bailey, announced an emergency regulation on Thursday that aims to limit access to gender-affirming care for Missourians. Missourians. They sound like Martians or something. Missourians. By setting sweeping new rules for those seeking treatment. He's since also launched an online government form that people can use to submit a complaint or concern about gender transition intervention you have experienced or observed in Missouri. Together, the initiatives mean Bailey has managed to introduce some of the most severe gender-affirming care restrictions yet without any past legislation. That's the part that gets me. So I didn't know that, the Attorney General could just do this. I always thought they had to pass a law or something, but I guess not. I guess the Attorney General is just like a little mini dictator, right? I mean, who knew, I mean, why do we even have democracy at all, folks, if the Attorney General can just decree shit like this? Okay. I will always fight to protect children because gender transition interventions are experimental, Bailey said in a statement. Science actually supports gender affirming care, and it's not experimental. Yes, it's true. It is not experimental. My office is stepping up to protect children throughout the state while we investigate the allegations and how they're harming children. That's the thing. If it was just to protect children, then his emergency regulation should only apply towards children, right? But it doesn't, as we'll see as we read on. So anyway, let's read what the actual rule says. The emergency rule makes it impossible for transgender people of all ages to access gender-affirming care unless they have exhibited a medically documented, long-lasting, persistent, and intense pattern of gender dysphoria for 3 years. They also have to prove they've received a full psychological or psychiatric assessment and 15 separate hourly sessions of therapy, at least 10 of which must be with the same therapist. This follows several anti-trans lobbyists and lawmakers who've attempted to falsely equate transness with severe mental illness. See, that's kind of fine. All right, let's read on. Let's read on. Okay, I'm chomping at the bit here, but let's read on. People seeking such care will have to be screened for autism and other pre-existing issues, such as anxiety and depression and pre-existing conditions, must have been treated and resolved before a person can access gender-affirming care. Healthcare providers also have to check that a minor who is trans has received a comprehensive screening annually and isn't suffering from social media addiction. All right. All of this is bullshit. Okay. Care is also prohibited if healthcare workers don't check yearly whether a patient is experiencing social contagion with respect to the patient's gender identity. This is likely spread on another GOP myth. This is likely based on yet another GOP myth that transness is a trend or craze. Proposal will go into effect on April 27th until February 6, 2024. Basically, it's going to last roughly a year. This is complete bullshit. So let's kind of go over what this rule is a little bit, right? So, okay, here we go. Exhibited a so all right, so what do you need now in order to just exist as a trans person in Missouri? What do you need? What are the hoops that you have to jump through, right? Let's go through these one by one. You have to exhibit a medically documented, long-lasting, persistent, and intense pattern of gender dysphoria for 3 years. How exactly do you prove that? It's essentially impossible. What, do you have to take a picture of yourself dressed up in your opposite gender's clothes or something? Do you have to seek treatment? You have to seek psychiatric help for it, something like that? You have to be diagnosed with gender. Essentially impossible to do that. But but even if you could somehow prove that, you have to do it for 3 years. So that means you have to wait for 3 years. So if you're, say, 15 and you're a trans person and you want to get on puberty blockers, you have to wait until you're 18. You have to do this. So no puberty blockers for you. Gone. Completely gone, right? That little provision in and of itself completely removes it for any minors. Okay. But even adults now will have to do this. So if you're 18 years old, right, and you've been waiting your whole life to transition, let's say you're 18 and you live at home with your parents and your parents are conservatives or whatever, and you've been just living in the closet because you know that they'll, beat the crap out of you or throw you out of the house or something if you, dared to, be truthful with them, right, about who you are. So let's say that you move out of your house finally when you're 18 and you get your own place and now you can't wait, you're going to transition. Nope, can't do that anymore. Now you have to wait 3 years and get all this professional fucking professionals and shit to examine you and shit and affirm that you have gender dysphoria, and you have to do it for 3 years in a row right off the bat, which is total fucking bullshit, right? Second rule, they have to prove they've received a full psychological or psychiatric assessment and 15 separate hourly sessions of therapy, 10 of which must be with the same therapist. Right. Why would you need to get therapy? I mean, the thing is that being a trans person is not like a mental issue, like, say, having depression or having anxiety or having anything like that. Why would you need to get therapy? Right? Doesn't make any... It serves no purpose. That's the problem. It doesn't serve any purpose except to show that you're actually trans. So, but you have to do it for 15 times? So what, you have to wait 15 weeks, right? You have to do it with, what if you get a doctor that just says, no, you're not trans? Great. Now you have to start over? 10 of them have to be with the same doctor, right? That's the first thing. This also puts a barrier in the fact that what if you can't afford therapy? So does that just mean that only rich people get to be trans now? Only the people who can afford 15 sessions with a doctor that's fucking $300 a session or something like that? All right. So just throwing another barrier there, right? Now you have to be also screened for autism, pre-existing issues, anxiety, depression. All pre-existing conditions must be treated and resolved. Well, how do you resolve? Let's say you do have autism, right? Or let's say you go to a doctor and he says you're on the spectrum and you're like on the low end of the spectrum and to the point where you don't even notice it. How the fuck do you resolve autism? You can't. That's a thing that you live with forever. Let's say you have anxiety. Well, so you're not allowed to transition until you resolve your anxiety issues. People live with anxiety for years and years and decades. Sometimes it just never goes away. Sometimes it's a thing that you need to learn to live with, right? So now you can't transition now. If you have any kind of mental problem whatsoever, like, I mean, it seems a little discriminatory to me there. That seems a little ableist if you don't. I mean, that seems like that should be against the law, right? And once again, it doesn't serve any purpose because, you know, being a trans person is not a mental disorder. It's not a mental disorder at all, right? Gender dysphoria is a disorder, but that's not a mental disorder in the same way that, you know, being depressed is. It's not like a chronic mental condition that, if left untreated, will, like, you know, deteriorate and make you until you, like, end up in a funny farm or some shit like that. You know, what it will do is that it'll make you unhappy if you don't do anything about it. If you don't transition, right? Then yeah, you will be unhappy, right? That can lead to things like depression and all that, but you're not depressed because you're chemically, you know, clinically depressed. It's like your depression has a definite cause. The cause being that you can't transition. See what I mean? It's like this is bullshit. This is bullshit any way that you look at it. Like, it's not a disorder that you can go and get therapy for and then it goes away, right? No, all of the medical science, all of the studies out there say the exact opposite of that. They say the way that you treat, you know, this type of issue is that you transition and you live your life as the gender you identify as, and the people who do generally become much happier and have much more fulfilling lives, right? It's bullshit. So, here we go. Healthcare providers have to check that a minor who is trans has received comprehensive screening annually isn't suffering from social media addiction. What the fuck does that even mean? Social media addiction? Like, that right there is made up right-wing bullshit. Okay? There is no such fucking thing as social media. Like, alright. Let me rephrase that. Okay. You can get addicted to anything. Alright? That's true. It doesn't matter what it is. People are addicted to. There's people out there who like can only eat chili cheese fries. They're like addicted to chili cheese fries, right? Not a joke. You can be addicted to gambling. You can be addicted to drinking Red Bull. You can be addicted to exercise, right? Exercise and living healthy, almost to the point where it's an unhealthy obsession. So yes, you can be addicted to social media, right? That is true. There are people who just sit there and scroll through Facebook 23 hours a day and shit. But what the hell does that have to do with being a trans person, right? What does that have to do with anything? Right? What it's not. Social media doesn't turn you into a trans person, right? I don't know what these people get these ideas from. You know, like if I'm just gonna go to a library, you know, we've been doing these stories about different states and shit that are like defunding their libraries now. Like we did one last week about Missouri defunding their library. I just read another story about Texas. The same shit happening in Texas now. They're defunding libraries because the state's losing a court case on censorship. Republicans basically lost a court case where they were trying to censor books, and now they're just deciding, okay, no more libraries, right? You know, you hear shit like this, and it implies that someone will go into a library and check out a book and then read something about a trans kid in the book and then decide, you know what, I'm a trans person too. And it's like, and that library book is what turned them trans, like, which is bullshit. It's the same kind of thing, like, when people are afraid that if you see a movie that has a gay cowboy in it, that it's going to turn you gay, you know, or something like that. Or if I watch a movie with a gay actor in it, it's going to turn me gay, or it's the dumbest shit of all time. You know, just because there are celebrities on the internet who are trans, and then like, if your kid has friends who are maybe curious about it, maybe they've come out as trans or whatever, it's not going to turn them trans. This is stuff that you're born with, you know, your sexual orientation, your gender identity. These are things that you're born with. They don't. You can't program somebody to do that, to be gay, to be trans. It doesn't work like that, right? In those cases where that happens, the kid, if the kid like does, maybe there's some peer pressure or something, right? We'll talk about this a little later. But in those cases where that does happen, you know what happens? The kid usually will decide it's not for them because they don't really feel it on the inside, right? And that leads us to the next little paragraph here, where it also says, care is also prohibited if healthcare workers don't check yearly whether a patient is experiencing social contagion with respect to the patient's gender identity. What the hell does social contagion even mean, and how do you check for it, right? Well, this is what I was just talking about. Social contagion, it's basically a conspiracy theory going through the right wing now, where they are blaming, they're saying that this is just a trend, right? This is a trendy thing. All the kids, their friends are doing it, and they want to do it too. And it'll, like, they'll outgrow it and all that stuff, right? And you'll hear they call it rapid onset gender dysphoria, right? This is what you'll hear on the right wing. They'll post Facebook memes about this, and it's generally bullshit, right? Some fucking cracky ass pseudoscience doctor came up with that shit. What it really means is that, oh well, all of their friends, one girl in the group of girls or whatever at the junior high school came out as trans, and now all of her friends want to be trans or whatever. And that's what they're basically saying. It's like, well, peer pressure is making their kids, and their kids are not really trans. And it's bullshit, because here's the reason why. Because even if that did happen, which it usually does not, but even if it did, even if there was a kid who maybe, their friend group are, they all turn trans and she wants to too, or something, or he wants to also to fit in or whatever, right? Even if that happened, the kid is going to find that it doesn't really make them happy, and that they don't actually feel like the other opposite gender. And there's only, so long that you can live a lie like that. And yes, in that case, it'll be a thing that they outgrow, right? Here's the thing about it. If your kid takes puberty blockers for a year, right? First off, if they're already in puberty, it's not going to do anything. Secondly, you just take them off of the blockers. If they decide after a year, that's not really me. I don't know. I was just going through a phase where I was exploring myself or whatever, right? And I'll admit that could be a thing, because kids don't know what they want when you're a teenager, and kids go through phases all the time where they explore stuff, and they, you know, and they want to, express themselves in different ways or whatever, and then maybe they decide it's not for them. Maybe they decide, no, I don't really actually feel like this. Maybe, even just admitting, giving the benefit of the doubt to this, which I personally think this is bullshit. This whole rapid fucking onset gender dysphoria. I personally think that's a load of shit. But even if it were true, right? Even if there is some truth to it, so you take, and the kid does, puberty blockers for a few months or a year, then you just take them off it, and then it's like no harm, no foul, right? Here's the thing. We know that that's how it works because that's what, puberty blockers, they're used all the time for different medical practices, things like for different like types of cancer that children get, stuff like that. They know what the effects of puberty blockers are and how the safety they know how to use them safely with children and teenagers, right? So it's not like the kid goes on this stuff for 6 months and then they never go through puberty. That's bullshit. That doesn't happen. So it's like there's no, it's hysteria is what this is. It's anti-trans hysteria, right? So just think about all of this shit that, we don't really need to read the rest of this. Basically, it goes on to people talk about how this is bullshit and blah, 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 right? You can read the rest of that for yourself. Let me go ahead and turn that off, right? But it's essentially bullshit pseudoscience, right? And this is what happens when you get a population of people who are scientifically illiterate, as the right wing tends to be, right? Because let's not forget, the right wing, they abandoned science decades ago, right? Decades and decades ago, right? When it started, when it became apparent that global warming was real, that's when the right wing got rid of science, right? And so you got to remember that they don't actually give a shit about science. They don't care about the truth. They don't care about actual what the actual medical experts say. But it just blows me away how people can see evidence of something like that so blatantly in their face and then just ignore it. Just ignore it for political reasons, right? Because it doesn't make them feel good. And that's really what motivates the right wing, in pretty much every case. Does it make them feel good? No, then they're against it. Does it line up with their politics? No, right? And now that's going to make people in Missouri, it's going to make trans people in Missouri suffer. Right? And that's the great, blatant sort of hatred now for trans people is it's bled over because, as we've said before many times, the whole like protecting the kids thing is an excuse, right? And even in this article, even in that article, when you saw the fucking what's his name, attorney general there saying I'm here to protect the children and all that shit, but the rules that he's put in are going to apply to everybody, including adults, right? And that's the thing, is that he has to say that. He has to say I'm here to protect the children, because you can't really criticize trans people without coming off like a giant bigot. You can't. There is no way to criticize trans people, right? Without sounding like a bigoted asshole. Okay. If if you don't care about that, then yeah, then you can say all the vile shit you want. But if you're someone who has to pretend that you're not a bigot, like say a politician, politicians have to at least pretend like they're doing stuff that's in the best interest of the public, right? So how can you cloak anti-trans bigotry in the language of something that's good for the in the public interest? Well, you have to cloak it in this, and you have to pretend that you're doing it to save the kids, right? I'm just here to protect children, all that other shit, right? And yeah, well, kind of looks like no, because if he wanted to just protect the children, he would have made his rule only apply to children. But he didn't do that. He made it apply to adults, because that is the goal this entire time, right? The goal for the right wing in this country is to erase trans people, right? Completely remove them from the public, you know, just like have it back how it was back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, right? Why are they doing this? I really think that this is a push to overturn the a de facto way, like, well, not no no no, that's, how do I put this? I really think that it's a push for them to remove the Civil Rights Act, and they won't be able to actually like do that in a legislative way. So I think that they're sort of leaning in on the trans stuff, the anti-trans stuff, because that sort of like circumvents it, right? And gives them an opening. Because if they can get everyone to agree that trans people don't have equal rights, then it's not that much further in order to extend that to other minorities, right? And if you sit here, if you think I'm like exaggerating and this is a slippery slope, you know, I mean, no, it's not a slippery slope, right? That's what they said when that's what people said when they were just talking about protecting children, and now look at this. Now they're completely, now if you're a trans person in Missouri, you should sell your house and move, right? Because for the next year, your rights to exist are essentially gone. Now, is this going to get overturned? Yes, yes. This will be overturned in a nanosecond in the courts, right? But remember, ultimately, the Supreme Court in this country is overrun with religious fanatics, right? The highest court in this land, the Christians got them in their pocket. So we can't depend on the courts anymore, folks, right? We could. We used to be able to. There was a time when the courts in this country were basically making the right decisions and upholding the Constitution, and we were living with the benefits of that. That time is over, right? So the real fighting's beginning. It's not going to be resolved until basically people can vote, right? Until we have one way of doing it, folks, right? The courts, we can't depend on the courts anymore. Best thing you can use the courts for now is to slow it down, right? To try to gum up the works, right? To try to get court cases and then try to get things dropped. But if it goes up to that Supreme Court, you can't. It's not a sure bet anymore, right? Not that it ever really was, but now the court is corrupted, right? The Supreme Court is compromised, and it will be for the foreseeable future. It's going to be a couple of decades at least until that Supreme Court can swing the other way, unless six of those, three or so of those justices die in a plane crash or something, or eat some bad sushi or whatever. Unless something like that happens, that court's going to stay the same way it is now. What we need to focus on is the legislative branch, right? And it's going to be a very tumultuous time in the United States for the next couple of decades at least. It's going to be very tumultuous, and we're going to start seeing more and more states limit people's rights, and we're going to see court battles that end up at the Supreme Court and are ultimately, upheld or whatever, right? And we're going to see more and more two Americas emerge. One America where people are free, where there's essentially a higher standard of living, where people are allowed to love who they want and express themselves the way they want and imbibe the things that they want to imbibe how they want, and are allowed to read the books that they feel like reading and are allowed to teach their children the things they want to teach them, and are allowed to basically live their best lives. And then we're going to see another America where people are forced to live a certain way, right? Forced to, you know, not read certain things, to not express themselves in certain ways, right? Forced to obey the tenets of a religion they don't believe in, right? Forced to, and are not able to do what they want to do with their own bodies. We're going to see that happen, and that divide is going to get larger and larger, right? And I really think it's going to manifest in many different ways, right? I think we're going to start seeing crime going up in red states. I think we're going to start seeing populations shrink even more. I think we're going to start seeing civil unrest in red states. I don't think it'll hit blue states so much, you know. Not really. There may be protests and things in blue states, right? But I don't think it'll hit blue states as much. I don't think there's going to be people marching in the streets in blue states very much. You know, they'll be smaller, but the big protests, they're going to be in Texas, in Florida, in Georgia, in Oklahoma, and all these places that are limiting rights and enforcing the will of our evangelical Christian conservative Christo-fascist overlords. Hello folks, if you like what I do and you want to support the channel, please consider buying something from my Etsy shop, supporting me on Patreon, liking and subscribing, and checking me out across my social media links listed below. Thank you all so much, and see you next time.